Welcome back to the channel. We are at build season location number 2, and guess who it is? That's right, Steve 2.0. We're gonna get some shit done today. We're working on the Hornet. We have put off suspension upgrades on this thing for a long time, so we're finally diving in. All right, viewers, here's what we got going on. The basics, what we're going to try to accomplish today is replacing as many bushings as we can in the front end. Steve bought a Pearl-Thane kit, so we got sway bar bushings, control arm bushings, new bump stops, and new sway bar links as well with new bushings. Something else we're looking to do on this car, the Hornet is in desperate need of like a lowering job in the front end, so we're doing a lot of this work to prepare for lowering plates. We are actually having them custom made right now. They're almost done. I think they'll be here in a week or so. So what we're hoping to do is, in conjunction with replacing all of these bushings, we're going to add the lowering plates as part of the reassembly process to drop the front end of this car down. First thing we need to do is get the shock out from inside the spring. The neat thing about small body AMCs that we just learned is you can unbolt this shock from the bottom here, and then from the engine bay side, you can undo the whole top hat, and I'll show you that. This is the shock top hat or tower. Notice that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, I believe there's 5 bolts, and this entire piece comes off, which allows you to remove the shock and pull it right out the top. First thing up in here, you guys can see there's the shock. It lands inside that upper coil spring. So there are 2 bolts, one on the front side and one on the back that you can't see. We're going to loosen those to try to undo the shock, and then we'll work on the top hat. Alright, so the upper shock bushing and nut is off. I think then we can blast this top hat out of the way. Yeah, I really hate that when you pull a nut off of a bolt and it's not a flange nut, so it slips all the way down inside the socket, and then you have to smack the thing off the concrete for 5 minutes to get it to fall out. With all the bolts outside of this top hat here, I think we might just need a screwdriver or a tap with a, oh no, it's loose. It's just the shock that's kind of pushing against it is all. All right, there you are. Now you can see that thing straight down inside the coil spring in there. So next thing, we're going to unbolt the shock from the bottom side, and then we'll kind of show you a modified version of the way to gently compress that spring while keeping it contained inside the shock tower here, or the strut tower, so that we don't die. Typical Wisconsin style here. The threads are not even really recognizable as such anymore. Looks like the AMC shocks. Oh wow, it's actually, are you seeing this? Did you see that? That was the first time, I swear. We didn't script this, I promise. Now is it just twisting the bolt though?
Yeah, maybe it's just fitting.
Oh man, that seemed like success there for half a second. Hold on. Okay, I'd like to go on record and say that this is a Wisconsin car, and we actually got that bolt or that nut to turn. No scripting here. We didn't plan that. That's amazing. I'd like to celebrate this victory while we have it, because the very next one is probably going to break off. Okay, viewers, I would like to go on record and say the second shock bolt came loose. I'm not kidding. What we had to do though, if you're ever doing this on your AMC small body, I did put just a little bit of upward tension on the lower control arm, which moves the upper control arm away from the frame just enough so that you can sneak your ratchet in there. I think we're using up all of our luck for the whole day right here, but this bolt is coming out, or nut, so we'll take it. Show everybody the condition of this shock. So, oh sorry, yeah, if you want to pull it all the way out first, there we go.
There.
And then now
So
we
now this is good. Oh.
Compression and nothing. I tried for 5 or so minutes to get the sway bar links undone by unbolting them, but those bolts or the nuts were seized onto the link itself. So quick snip with a cutoff wheel. Now the old sway bar links are out. Sway bar links are out, and sway bar's out. The compressor that we saw online actually uses a shock flange like this. So Steve and I were thinking, mainly Steve, that if we cut this off of the bottom, drill a larger hole through the bottom here, then we can use this piece of 3/4 inch threaded rod right through that flange, all the way up through the top hat of the strut, right here, and it should fit that 3/4 inch bolt. And then we can put a nut on the bottom and a nut on the top, and then we can use the bracket that holds the spring right now as a way to compress the spring up into the shock tower so that we can get the upper control arm out. This is a piece of 1/4 inch steel. We actually just made this instead of messing with the old shock flange. So what this is going to do is this 1/4 inch piece is going to represent or act just like the old shock mounting flange. And then there's 2 through bolts here. We're going to put nuts on the bottom. And then there's a 3/4 inch piece of threaded rod and a nut right here. So this is going to lock into the lower spring perch inside the AMC chassis. And then on top, we're going to thread this all the way through the upper top hat and put a nut and a washer on top. And we're going to use this threaded rod. And as we crank on the nut up top, it's going to pull the spring up and compress it and hold it safely. So we'll show you exactly what this looks like when it's on the car. This is going to be like a 2-man operation just because we put the top hat on already. Okay, take 2. So we took the top hat back off. We're going to assemble the tool and then drop it down, and then we'll bolt it back in place using the shock bolts, or shock bolt holes, I mean. The idea behind this is you use the lower spring perch and the top hat up here to compress the spring. That way there's no way that this spring can kick out and kill you. Once we get it compressed, we will have to disconnect the lower spring perch from the upper control arm with these 2 bolts right here. Then the upper control arm via the 2 bolts up there, and the lower control arm down here. We can slide this whole thing out, pop the ball joints and stuff, and then get to the bushings. You can see there's the tool right there. We're going to position this so that these 1/4 inch bolts drop right through the 1/4 inch plate that we made. It's just a little too wide to. Here's the finished assembly. Here's what it looks like way up close. So there's one of the bolts sticking through. There is the 3/4 inch rod, and there's the plate that we made that goes across. The other bolt like this is on the other side. Up here, got the whole piece of threaded rod, and then we've got 2 washers stacked on top of each other with grease. We're going to run this nut down. This is going to be our nut that's going to pull up the spring. If you have a small body AMC with this very funky suspension design, you should make one of these tools. Right now, the upper control arm is separated from the spring perch because it's held in by the 2 bolts and that big giant threaded rod right there. This spring is compressed and it's just hanging there free right now. Depending on what service you have to do, you could leave this spring just like that, not touch it at all. And then when you're ready, reassemble everything else and line it up with these 2 studs right here, put the bolts back on, and you're all done. In our case, I think we do have new polyurethane spring isolators for the top of these. So I think what we're going to do now is work on either popping upper and lower ball joint, then going after the control arm bolts to try to get both control arms out of here so that we can unload this spring all the way and take it out. And then we can clean this up, and then we can replace the strut, or I'm sorry, the spring isolator up top, and then be ready to reassemble everything else. Anyway, if you have a small body AMC, make yourself one of these tools. It only took us maybe, an hour of drilling a couple holes, cutting a piece of steel, and getting a piece of threaded rod and some other bolts. Right now we're working on pulling the 2 bolts out for the steering arm. We're just going to leave the steering arm connected to the tie rod. Those bolts are in there pretty good. They go all the way into the spindle. So we're going to see if a 1/2 inch ratchet will do it. All right, they're in there. Oh, round. Oh boy. Or did the socket just let go?
Is it the bolt that?
Oh yeah, she rounded a little bit. It's not bad yet. If we can get a 6-point on there, it'll be okay. Come on. If we take off the lower control arm bolt there, do the tie rod and the 2 upper control arm bolts, we can take this whole mess out. Oh no,
We gotta
except
do
for
the
the
brake
brake. Shit.
I don't care if we have to re-bleed the brakes or anything, so that don't worry
Okay.
about that part because
Steve is popping the hard line off of the brakes over there so that we can pull the soft line off. I'm gonna start working on the upper control arm bolts. When I'm done with those, we'll undo the tension rod and the lower control arm and hopefully pull this whole mess out as one. That way we can do all the ball joint replacement and all that other stuff and the bushings off of the car. So crammed into the side of this engine bay. Oops. These are control arm bolts. Yeah. How do you guys ever deal with this where you just have all of the wrenches that you own, they're not in the toolbox anymore, they're just on the floor? I don't know. That's usually how it goes when you're trying everything under the sun to try to get something to come out.
Accumulate all of them
Yeah,
in
look
one
at this.
spot.
There's a crowbar under here. Okay, so I think we're about ready to pull this sucker out. So he's gonna pull up on that spring a little bit more to give us just a smidge more room. Get this cooperated all here. Lower is free. Take some weight off of it. Go up on that spring. There. Ha! All right, there you go, ladies, gents, whatever you call yourselves. Yeah, it only takes about, I don't know, a couple hours or so, maybe half a day. But there is one side, spindle, upper and lower control arm, and everything. So
Next day.
yeah.
This is the next day.
Right.
2 weeks later.
Yeah, it's the next day, 2 weeks later. We actually have changed course a little bit. There's a guy in, the Michigan area that has disc brakes off of a Pacer. So we are waiting for those parts to ship. So we are going to abandon the front drum brakes on the Hornet. Hooray, it's freaking awesome. While we're doing that, we're gonna replace all the control arm bushings in the front, as well as the ball joints. So I'll kind of show you guys where we're at now and what we hope to get done tonight. What you're looking at here is the lower control arm and the front drum brake off of the passenger side of the Hornet. Right now, we're working on getting the lower ball joint separated. These are really, really old, rusty, and stuck. Essentially, all we really need to salvage from this entire setup is the lower control arm and the steering arm. Everything else is going to be new. The spindle, all the wheel bearings, and all that stuff is going to be new or used from the Pacer. So we're going to try to pop this lower ball joint. If that doesn't come out with the pickle fork, then we'll get the steering arm off of there, and we may have to resort to more destructive methods. Greetings from the workbench. You are actually mounted on the upright of the pallet racking above Steve's bench. Anyway, observe this calamity. We're going to try to get that thing out of there. So let's see. We pulled the drum off of the outside. So we undid the spindle nut and all that stuff, pulled the drum out. Let's see, here's the spindle right here, and here's the steering arm. There's actually 4 bolts. There's 2 bolts that run through the steering arm and through the spindle, and those come through to this side right here. So we got to undo those 4 bolts, and then all of this mess should fall right off. Greetings from the jack handle. That's right, that's where you are now. So we already took one of the nuts off. You're probably on this one. All right, here we go, fire in the hole. Seems like that one's good.
he's loose on this side.
Right? Yep. Wow, nothing. Okay, time for the big ratchet. All right, let's see.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah. we got it. Wow. Sucker is on there. Okay. Whew. That was stubborn. There we go. So here it is. Spindle and steering arm. You can kind of see how this is all tangled in amongst itself there. So the spindle is actually two pieces. Looks like here's the piece that actually mounts to the ball joints, to the lower control arms. Then there's a separate piece here where the actual spindle where the wheel bearings ride bolts to the upright portion of the spindle. And then a third piece is the steering arm. So that's kind of a good view right there. You can kind of see all three pieces. This is a drum brake spindle. We don't need that, but we do need the upright and we do need the steering arm. So we're gonna blow this apart and take it over to my place, sandblast all this, paint it black, and then swap in the, I think is it just the spindle that's different for the disc brakes? Well,
Yeah,
we won't know.
Yeah, and I think it's just a distance. It's just a standoff. So I think you can actually just change them by putting spacers, but the spindle itself, I believe, is the same.
Okay, so yeah, that's our plan. When we get all the parts from the guy in Michigan that has all the AMC stuff, or the Pacer stuff, all the Pacer stuff is gonna go in place. We'll only replace what we have to adapt the disc brake stuff to the Hornet. I'm just checking to see how crooked this shit is, but seems like it's all right. Passenger side, we're gonna do the same thing. Blast that out of there and get this whole mess separated from this whole mess.
Oh man!
Yeah, this little baby tripod is just saving my bacon here. Now I get you guys all these weird shots because it's so hard to get the camera in the right place. Anyway, so just for your viewing pleasure, check out this lower control arm bushing. This thing is toast. Absolutely dry rotted, breaking apart, peeling out of there, separated from the inner sleeve. So I think what we're gonna try to do is fashion our own tool using some threaded rod, socket, piece of pipe, some washers. So I'll cut, or maybe I'll put you on time lapse while we sort that out, and then we'll come back right before we actually push this out. Okay, so this is what ended up being our solution. Here, let me put you guys down and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So the tool that we ended up with was this, 2 jam nuts, a couple of washers stacked up, the plate that we made for the spring strut compressor the last time, and then a piece of black gas pipe that was just a little bit larger than the bushing sleeve that we needed to bring out. Do you have one of those rubbers?
It's rather personal, don't you think?
Oh, this is what the rubber part of the bushing looks like. And what we ended up doing, believe it or not, was we ran the threaded rod through the bushing, and then we just put a nut. Oh yeah, and then there was a piece of pipe in here, right? So it was like this, right here, and it was pushing up against the outside of that bushing. Just like this, just against the rubber part, because we don't really care about that, we're gonna destroy it. And then on the inside edge, right here, where the sleeve was, we just put a nut right in front of that sleeve, just like that, and then we turned the threaded rod until this nut was sucked up tight to the sleeve, and then kept turning this rod and just pulled the sleeve right out of the middle of the bushing. So this is what we're left with when it all comes all the way through. The rubber has enough tension to hold this nut to keep it from spinning, and it just pulls the sleeve right out of the center. And then, yeah, the rubber portion can just be pulled out with a needle or a channel lock.
Ta-da!
Yes, this is the way to do this. Aha! Much faster.
A little PB and see if we can do the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna get out of the way of that so I can catch the channel locks in the bag. Tend to keep. Look at this. Come on, we got it down to a science now. This is ridiculous.
Ta-da!
Oh man, that is so much easier. Nice.
Ta-da!
Wow, that worked. Just
Yeah, it was just a matter of finding the right combination.
swimmingly. Yeah. Okay. Is this recording? Oh, it has been this whole time. Are we on time lapse? Oh boy. So at this point, all the control arm bushings are removed, both upper and lower.
Yep.
We do have one other thing that we want to try to solve. Yeah, so here you can see the shells. The shell of these bushings actually stays with the control arm, and the replacements, I think I said this already, so forgive me if I have. The replacement bushings just slide right into the old shells, just like that. The next thing with these, we're going to bring them to my house and send them through the blast from the past. That way we can get these coated new black paint, and then we'll put the new bushings in. It is the next day. We're back in my shop. Steve is out of town, so in the meantime, while I'm saving my pennies for more parts for the Datsun, I figured I would take all the suspension parts for the AMC that we're planning on reusing and sandblast and maybe even paint these. What I've got going on here, pull the lower ball joints out of the lower control arms here. Everything, any part of this suspension that's got grease on it, I'm gonna put it over my oil catch and hit it with some brake cleaner and scrape all that stuff off of there, just so I don't contaminate my sandblast media. I don't know if you guys can see how rusty this is. Right? It's still in good shape, it's just, it's got a ton of rust, surface rust on it. So my goal here is to try to paint it black and put it back kind of methodology. This stuff is really hard to find, I'm sure, and aftermarket, I'm sure it's really expensive. Here's like the upper control arm. Now Steve did take a wire wheel to this and he got most of the grease and grime out of here. So I don't have to do anything really with this, just throw it in the blaster. Again, here's the lower control arm. There's a ton of grease piled up on this thing, both inside and out, so I'm gonna have to spend some time spraying this off and wire wheeling it and scraping it and stuff over the bin, just so that I don't get any of that in my blaster. Join me over at the blaster. Okay, I may have misspoke. What I meant was join me at the garbage can. So the first thing I think I'm gonna do is just scrape these, right? There's so much crud on here. I don't know if this is undercoating or if it's grease. I might try this over on the wire wheel. What I'm gonna start with is just wire wheeling all this stuff, just to cut down on the amount of work that the sandblaster has to do. You know what? You're right. I should be wearing a mask. Just in case anybody's wondering, this stand-up drill press, a gift from a good friend of mine, Joe. He's got a PhD in criminal science, and forgive me, Joe, if I got that wrong. Either way, dude is amazingly smart. He has his own YouTube channel. I believe it's RJ Beams Premeditated Fiction. He does book reviews and stuff on police procedural novels. So if you're into that kind of thing, check out his channel. I'll link it here. Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate the heck out of this thing, and I use it all the time. I'm gonna finish this stuff up and get to that. So I'm just gonna finish giving all this stuff a bath and brake clean, and then just kind of a quick wipe down. Try to get a few more satisfying before and after shots. So here is the control arm before, lower control arm. And here's what it looks like after. So some of this stuff is a little bit deeper, and I didn't want to spend too much time on any particular place where there might be any of that leftover undercoating. So anyway, yeah, that's after blasting. I didn't spend too much time under here. I couldn't get that undercoating off. So like here is a part of the spindle, and there's after. So kind of the same thing, right? Some deeper pitting rust on this. This is heavy rust, but that sandblaster is doing pretty good. All right, I'm gonna time lapse and do as much of this blasting as I can. We have a social thing tonight, so I'll do as much of this and then hit the road and pick up on it tomorrow. Editor Steve here. Looks like this clip did not have any audio. So what I'm going over here is showing how the parts showed up or how the parts turned out after sandblasting. A lot of these had really deep rust on them, so my sandblaster did the best that it could. I got these as clean as possible. And then I used this product, OSPHO. OSPHO is an orthophosphoric acid substance. You wipe it on the parts. It reacts with the iron oxide, which is rust, and converts it to iron phosphate, which is a stable compound that will no longer rust. So you can also use this chemical to etch clean metal by just wiping it on, letting it sit for 30 minutes, and then wiping it off. In this case, I let all the suspension parts sit for 24 hours, and now I'm ready to paint. Editor Steve here. Looks like the last 4 attempts that I made to try to make an outro for this video all recorded without audio. This video was a ton of work. We've never taken the front suspension of an AMC apart before. It took us a little bit of extra time, and we definitely learned a lot along the way. All the parts are now cleaned up, ready to go back together. In the next video, we're going to take all the front suspension parts that I just cleaned up and painted, along with all new bushings. We're going to reassemble the front end. We're going to install lowering plates, and we'll show everybody how that works to actually lower the front end of an AMC. And then hopefully, if we get the parts from the gentleman in Michigan and or from another source, we're going to show a disc brake upgrade for the front of the Hornet. So for all of you who are subscribed, thank you so much for that. If this is your first time at the channel, check out the other videos on the AMC, check out any of my videos on the Datsun or the Oldsmobile. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.